Hi guys, my name is Anna, you're watching SimCue, and without further ado, let's get into this video. I am so excited for today's build, but I've also been dreading doing the voiceover because it's just a lot, and we're currently dog sitting, so I am a little bit tired from getting up early to walk the dog. But this is or will be the Palais Garnier, which is the opera house in Paris. This was requested by Linda, and Linda, thank you so much for your request. I think I told you the same thing as I have unfortunately to tell others, which is I love your request and I will see you when I get around to it, but please don't expect it to be out in just a few weeks. But then I kind of got obsessed with this build because I didn't even know of this building until you asked for it. And as soon as I saw a picture, I fully understood why you wanted to see this created in The Sims 4. So I will definitely be talking more about the building itself along in this video, but I feel like right now we actually need to comment on what's going on. So what you're currently watching is me desperately trying to make some columns. The Opera House has these like multi-story large columns out front, and I knew from the very beginning that this was something I needed to get right. It's very much something that is highly recognizable on the building, and so I tried out a lot of different things because normal columns just wouldn't cut it. And it's definitely not the first time I have experienced that. When you make columns really tall, they also just look really slim, and they kind of end up looking like they wouldn't be able to support anything really. So I tried out a lot of different things, but what we're finally seeing here start to work out for us are these debug pieces from life and death. And I was so happy when I found these, tested them with the tool mod, and found out that they actually did rotate, because that is unfortunately a downside to the live edit objects. A lot of them don't work with the tool mod because they don't really follow the rules of regular items. So the fact that these debug columns actually worked with the tool mod was just such a miracle. And as you will come to see shortly, they are really a selling point of this building, so it was so important to me to actually get them right. So I played around with the balconies a little bit. I couldn't really figure out the depth that I wanted. I feel like the perfect depth would have been like 1.5 tiles, but that's not really an option. But I really wanted them to have a little bit of an overhang, and I think right now it might look like a little bit too much, but as the building comes together and we see just how grand the building is, these balconies all of a sudden seem very small. So I sized down the bottom piece of the column so that I could actually fit 2 columns within just 2 tiles, and thankfully that meant that we could just squeeze everything, which is so lucky because I had not at all like done any counting as to like how big this build would actually be. And there's no doubt, had I not sized down here in the beginning, I would have had so much trouble along the road because this place is just massive. So the order I'm working in might seem a little bit weird. It makes sense in my head, but basically I want to capture all of the features that I find are the most recognizable from the building. So that's why you in a moment will see me spend so much time on the columns. That is why I'm currently spending time on finding a gate for these archways, because once we get some of these main feature points right, it becomes a lot easier to see where we are going and also where we might have to make some compromises. So we're also going to place the first of many sculptures, and when I started this build I would have never imagined how many times I would come to use items from the vampire pack, but it really came in clutch multiple times. We're using these archways all over the building and also so many of the sculptures, and I find that they all just work so well in this lighter color. So now might be a good time to explain some of the different wall heights we got going on here, because it is kind of all over the place at the moment. This is a very tall, very grand building, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we want every single floor to be the highest wall height, because let's be honest, many items just end up looking really weird with tall wall height or just looking really small. So it's about finding that balance where each of the items look like they are proportioned correctly, but also the building overall still looks really tall. So we have a tall foundation to add some overall height. Then we have the first floor being a medium wall height, just so that the arches match a lot better, and also so that the first floor seems so much taller. So the first floor is the tall wall height, as you can see here with the columns, but then the third floor is actually only short wall height because I almost wanted to add it to the second floor, so that when you look at it from the outside, the second and the third floor almost just look like one entire insanely tall floor. And then I think we will get back to the fourth floor later on, because right now we have some columns to comment on. So as you can see, these columns are made up of multiple pieces. I assume in Life and Death they are supposed to look like a broken column, but by rotating them, flipping them, we can start to combine the pieces to actually make them look like one intact column. column. But while these pieces are clearly meant to look like they match, they actually don't fully match. So I had to get really precise with the smallest rotation so that we could cover up as many seams as possible. So if you zoom in close, you can definitely see that they are multiple pieces, and you can also find the seams, and maybe there is a slight visual glitch, but overall, and especially from a distance, they really work so well. And then realizing that I could just copy them and each of the items actually followed along was a major game changer, because I thought for sure I would have to custom place every single column piece. So I was very relieved to find out that I could sort of skip that. And I'm also just very pleased with the result, because it was definitely the part that I was dreading the most. I couldn't really figure out to begin with how I was going to deal with these large columns, but I also knew that if I didn't get them right, the building just wouldn't look like I envisioned it, and that would really bother me and I would not be satisfied with it. So for the smaller columns, I opted to use the ones from Castle Estate. We are using multiple pieces from the kit, but to make everything a bit more cohesive and also make them seem just a little bit bigger, we're using the same pedestal that comes with the Vampires pack as the larger ones are also using. And I think even with these few items, you can start to see the building coming together, because we have now covered some of the most important features. But we still have a long way to go. So right now we're adding in this rounded roof piece at the top. So this is technically the 4th floor, and what you will see in a moment is that I will turn it into half walls, because while I in some areas need very tall walls, because again we want the building to almost be as tall as possible, I specifically in this area wanted them a bit shorter. But it was definitely fun to get to play around with so many different items that I usually might not get around to using, because they are just very specific, I feel like. And I think overall the packs that we are using the most is Life and Death. We're using it for the larger columns, but we will also be using it for a lot of details and also smaller columns. High School Years, because we're using the frieze that I'm currently adding almost everywhere on the building. Vampires, as you can already see with the archways, with all of the sculptures that we will be adding more and more of. And Discover University, just because it also has some really nice decorational pieces for the walls. And then I almost forgot, but of course Castle Estate. Now we do end up using more packs than just those, but I feel like those 5 specifically are what actually made the building come to life. So the roof pieces I'm currently adding are also from Life and Death, and I feel like I forgot to mention with the packs that I just listed that what also worked really well was that all of the swatches actually matched quite nicely. There might be a slight variation, but all of the packs basically have this very like light beige stone tone. I think in real life the building might actually be a little bit lighter, like a little bit more on the wider side, but because I can't change the color of the debug columns, we kind of have to just work around that. So I do think that this is what works the best for this build. So I'm currently testing out a few things. This is not what it's going to look like, but every single part of this building is just heavily decorated, and I had to figure out how to kind of mimic that in The Sims 4. So one thing we will be adding to mimic one of this building's many features are these windows from Realm of Magic. Now in real life this technically isn't windows, it's more like a carved in area in the stone, but since I have like no way to actually do that, I thought it would make sense to add some windows just to get more of that detail. So I found that the smaller windows worked the best, but they were unfortunately also floating a little bit, which is why you saw me lower them all with the tool mod so that they are flush against this floor trim. And then on the real life opera house, in all of these like rounded areas, there are busts of famous people. I think there's specifically one of like Beethoven and Mozart, but we have a kind of limited bust selection. So this is just multiple busts of Princess Cordelia. But I do think it turned out quite nicely, and it was nice to be able to actually add a golden detail. The opera house has multiple golden details, but I was way more limited. Not only because we actually don't have that many golden items, but also because the ones that we did have didn't necessarily match the build. But we do have these golden roof pieces from Life and Death, which I sized up, and we will be adding them like all around the roof. And this is just one of the many items that had to be sized up, because with a building this big, everything looked very small. So I wanted to test the roof color, and this one specifically, which is honestly the only one that comes close to the proper color, is from Eco Lifestyle. Lifestyle. So in Eco Lifestyle, I'm sure it's just a metal roof, but it was the only one that had a color that actually came close to this copper that is oxidized, which is what we see on so many old buildings. But we're now finally getting some wallpaper. So the first one I tested here is the one from Discover University, and I absolutely loved the brick. I loved the texture, but unfortunately I found the color to just be a little bit too yellow, which wasn't really working for me. So I don't know the order, but I remember I also tried out the stone from Get Together, but that just didn't really look clean enough. And then I tried out some from Life and Death, but they just didn't really work either. And you can also see that I'm like trying the same thing multiple times. But we eventually end up with this one from High School Years, which is a little lighter than I would have preferred, but it still had like the nicer brick. It was basically the best like in between. So here on top of the roof, I did these taller half walls that are to mimic pedestals because we have really big sculptures that we will be adding later. And then for the foundation, I went in with the one from Castle Estate because it is a larger brick, a bit of a rougher brick, and also because I knew I would then have matching stairs. So that's most of the front done. We are now finally moving on to the sides. So wrapping around the building looks almost identical. We still have the large columns. We also have the balcony, and I also added in similar wall details. And in general, there's just a lot of repetition for this build, which isn't uncommon. It's a very symmetrical build. It's a very grand build. It's the same thing over and over and over. But the sides still look a little bit different from the front, which is why I here decided to use the columns from Life and Death. And I found that these windows, or maybe in real life they are actually doors, had more of like a French balcony. So luckily in the Life and Death debug, there is a small piece that match the fence that comes with the pack. It's not quite as clean, but from a distance you can't really see that, so that worked out quite well. Now unfortunately I haven't been to Paris yet, so I haven't actually seen this building for myself, but it's definitely been added to the bucket list. But if you like me know nothing about this build, I can inform you that it was built between 1861 and 1875. It was built for Emperor Napoleon III. I know it is not the same Napoleon that you might think of, that would be Napoleon I, but either way that is not too important. What is more interesting is that it was designed by the architect Charles Garnier, and because he did such a good job, the building was named after him. And while Palais of course means palace, this actually was never used as a palace. It has always been an opera house, but because it looked so big, so grand, so gorgeous, and very much like a palace, it was named Palais Garnier. Now we're slowly working our way down the lot, and maybe you have foreseen it, I clearly have not yet, but this is way too big. But that won't hold me back from just continuing on and realizing much later and then downsizing this entire section. So right now I'm just going off of the reference photos, which has 5 windows, and we are again using the frieze from High School Years, and then we are adding, I end up using the one from the base game because I didn't want these windows to be quite as detailed, but we are still adding a little bit of a window top in the lack of a better word. I think in general I will come in short when it comes to describing this kind of building. But on top of the larger windows, they also have some smaller windows, so we are adding those in as well. Now, while it was really easy to find a lot of reference pictures for this building, I did actually struggle a little bit more with finding like close-ups so I could see certain details a little bit better. So it actually wasn't until I was working on this part of the build that I realized that maybe the windows are actually wooden, like a dark wooden color, but at this point that was just too late because I really liked the windows that I had chosen. And guess what? Not all of them came in the same dark wooden swatch, so my version at least has black windows. Now I struggle a bit with the lower windows because they are arch, and there's just a limit to how many arch windows we have in the game, and most of them were like too narrow. So while a lot of this footage has been cut, I will also show you some of the pain that I went through trying to make a custom window, because I was determined to use these archways from vampires because they were definitely what worked the best for the build, and I tried so many different windows in the hopes of finding one that would match this archway. And I finally realized that since the archway had already sort of opened up the wall, I could actually size up a window. So I added these windows from Get Together and I sized them up, I think, to like 1.15 specifically. And I was honestly very pleased with myself. So we skipped ahead a little bit because it's the same foundation, it's the same stairs, it's the same wallpaper. But I tried to add this, again, pedestal from Vampire, sizing it down so that it could maybe look like a wall feature. But I end up not really liking how it looks. And also this one would be showing on the inside, which isn't really ideal either. So I will be coming back and switch them into the ones from high school years. Now, having stairs that can flare is cool, but if someone can explain to me why they didn't allow them to flare into a foundation so that we could actually have stairs that followed like a round foundation, which would have been like super duper cool, I would be happy to hear that explanation, because I don't get it. Why? That would have been so nice. Anyway, we are adding in once again the small fence pieces from Life and Death. We are, as I already mentioned, switching these out with the ones from high school years. And then in a moment, I will finally come to realize that this building is way too big. Not overall, just this part we've specifically been working on. So each side of this building has these like pop out and rounded rooms, and I definitely didn't want to compromise those, which is why I realized that I need to minimize somewhere else. And I don't really think I'd given it a single thought that even though we're working on a 64 by 64 lot, it might be too small. We are, if I haven't already mentioned it, in Del Sol Valley. I looked through our different options and I just found that this lot in the, is it called like the Pinnacles, were the one that was like the most glamorous. The lighting, however, is absolutely horrendous. I honestly, looking at the footage, don't know how I managed to build everything on this lot. So I've been contemplating if the lot in Brindleton Bay would have actually been slightly better. The lighting is definitely way better on that lot. My only issue is really that even though the lot is really nice, when you are in the world map, it just looks like it definitely does not fit into this world, but it still could definitely be an option. Now, while I've been rambling, which I unfortunately do quite a lot, we are moving on to creating another entrance. You've already seen me struggle a little bit with the curved walls, and the reason why I haven't really commented on it is because we will be coming back to that again, because there's just always something with that. And usually when I run into any kind of struggle, I just let it rest for a while and work on something else, which is why we are creating this part of the entrance. So in real life, one of the sides have these like big curved slopes that come up to this entrance, but there was really no way for me to make that work, and I am glad that I didn't even try, because there would not be space for it. But the entrance here has a slight overhang that is held up by these grand statues, and we don't really have anything like that in the game. Even with my many packs, we don't have a single statue that seems to be holding anything, which honestly kind of surprised me, because we have so much crap in the catalog. How do we not have that type of statue? Anyway, I tried out a couple of different things, again using items from Vampire, seeing if that would work. Then I thought if I size up this ballerina, maybe that would work, because at least she's like holding one hand up. I even tried with the statue from Jungle Adventure. Nothing was really working. So in the end, I came back to this sculpture from Vampires and realized that what I'd struggled with in the beginning was trying to put her on a pedestal, and if I instead just sized her up, that just worked so much better. And then I decided to go in with the archway from Castle Estate. Even though we are otherwise using one from Vampires, it was just nice that it was taking up a bit more space on the wall. So for the cursed walls, as I prefer to call them, one of the issues is that we are very limited when it comes to windows. And while I've been trying to save space by using the smaller curved walls, it just really wasn't working, because I really wanted to be able to have a window right at the front. I also really wanted to be able to add a few columns for some more detail. And I also really wanted to be able to add a balcony, and none of those three things were possible. So I decided to instead go in with the bigger curve, which was definitely the right choice, and then instead just minimizing the rest of the building. So with the larger curve, even though the columns still follow the grid, they do look like they are attached to the building. And so by scooching things around and also by having the columns, I could then actually add balconies, because the columns sort of hide the sides where you can clearly see that the balcony is straight and the wall is curved. Yeah. And then at the bottom level, again from Life and Death, I found a curved version of the fence. And so I added that to again mimic more of like a French balcony. The windows are surprisingly enough, from For Rent. I wanted something that looked similar to the rest of the windows that we had, but there was actually no singular base game window that really worked. So while the other windows have the cross at the bottom and these ones have theirs at the top, I still think that that works quite well. And then we're just adding more details, adding some more details, and finally adding some final details, because this building is just covered in wall decorations. And I really hope that you are appreciating it, because a lot of these had to be custom placed. So from here we are moving into working on the roof of this rounded part, and I've decided to show you this clip just so that you can see my suffering, because I thought I would just, you know, make a custom slightly smaller rounded area and then have a raised roof. You know, it was a good idea in my mind, and then I found out that it was actually pretty difficult to make something completely round. So this is just my first attempt, and then I thought, oh, it's just because I'm getting distracted, I'll try once more. And this is how far I got before I realized, wait, I can just find like a round item, right? So looking through the catalog, sure enough, there were actually multiple options. So one is this base game fire pit, but unfortunately it has some like really weird shadows. So instead what we end up using is this, I guess, fountain from high school years. And don't worry, it will be completely covered by a roof. But basically I just wanted a slight bit of a wall so that the roof could sit a little bit higher. If it doesn't make sense right now, I swear it will make sense in the end. But I realized that there was also like a middle roof, and then this part was like on top of that. So that's what we're currently adding. And then for our now like fake wall, I went in with these dormers from Get Famous, and they worked out really well. First and foremost because the color was quite nice for the rest of the build, but also because it might be like the only one that actually has a round window, and I'm not even sure that these are dormers in real life, that they would actually have windows. It might again be a similar thing where it's more of just like a rounded detail in the brick, and so I think these ones from Get Famous just add a really nice detail. So copying what is right now a hallway to the other side, I realized that the building actually still seemed too big, and also it wasn't centered. And I think that will be my one takeaway from this video. If you ever decide to do a really big build, center it from the beginning, because this was so annoying to do. After having placed all of these items, I got so lucky that they actually stuck with the room and like moved along with it, because this wasn't just a quick fix of like moving the entire lot. You see, since it hadn't been centered from the beginning, I had just, you know, gone all out, and now I actually had to narrow everything down because otherwise it would be too wide for the lot. So if you can't already tell, that really sucked. But eventually we get there, we move everything, all of the parts, we custom place some of the small items again that unfortunately disappeared in the move, and it all turns out well in the end. But it does also mean that these like rounded walls are now right on the edge. In general, this entire build takes up the entire lot, a 64 by 64 lot, and it's just one building. So normally the part of the build with this rounded wall also had like windows on the side, but I quickly realized that we just had to completely skip those because there were no way there was going to be space for them. And that's just how it is when you try to translate something from real life into The Sims 4. There will be compromises. So again, the only thing I can really say is try your best to figure out what are like the main focal points of this build, because if you get those right, I honestly think you could do almost like whatever and the build would still be recognizable. So this part of the build is almost done, and I have a needy dog. He's adorable, but he's also a lot of work. You're very needy. Yeah. Oh no, it's run away. Where was I? Oh yeah. So this side of the building is almost done. We are doing a little bit of flooring, which also took me quite a few tries to figure out, and also multiple angles, because I had to find a spot where the natural light was hitting in a way where it wasn't like too light and too bright so that I could actually see the color, but also not shaded. And I just went in with like basic white marble floor from Get Famous, and then we are finally actually getting into copying all of this to the other side. And I can tell from editing that I'm not very used to actually using the copy tool, because a lot of the builds I do aren't symmetrical. Because looking back at it now, I'm like, why didn't I turn all of it into a room and then just copied the entire room and flipped it, because then I wouldn't really have to worry about the whole thing being mirrored either. But I didn't do that. And another thing I didn't do was check at the very beginning that everything was just right. So I am sorry if we are a little bit all over the place when it comes to the camera angles, but I kind of noticed that something wasn't adding up, and yet I couldn't really find the mistake. So I thought, oh, I've just placed this incorrectly and then moved everything. And then I continued on. So I will also be copying the front to the back, and I don't even notice that this isn't like properly centered either. And I just keep on going until at this point where I realize that this should be adding up. So why isn't it? And I think you can almost like see the panic in the camera of me going back and forth trying to figure out where my missing tile is. And it's because I had forgotten the one tile bump out at the front, which now meant that I had to move everything one tile. To my defense, it is a big build. There's just so much to try and keep track of, but I finally found it and everything now works, and we can continue copying and working on the roof. So the walls I'm quickly adding here are the actual wall of the 4th floor, which is at our tallest wall height, but of course don't appear all that tall because of the half walls. And if you think that the facades are heavily detailed and look like something that would take a long time and be difficult to do, I can tell you that the roof is basically the same. Sure, the roofs here on the side are kind of simple to do because they follow the grid, but once we get into custom placing roofs, that's a whole other story. But while the footage of me working on the roof continues, I can tell you a little bit more about this building. So the architectural style of the building, which is unfortunately something I am really bad at, is kind of embarrassing because I really like architecture. I also really love art, but I am absolutely terrible at like historical time periods. So when other people are pointing out like what time period this painting is from and how you can see it, and the same thing with buildings, I'm just like nodding and agreeing and be like, yeah, sure, like that's Renaissance. I know that too, of course. So when I tell you that this is a mix of Baroque and Renaissance, and also a third thing that I didn't even know what was, which is why I haven't added it, that's not because I just know that kind of stuff. That's because I Google that kind of stuff. But according to the Wikipedia page, that is apparently an interesting architectural choice to mix those two kind of styles. So in the back, you just saw me add those like really tall half walls, and these will essentially work as our 5th floor. And I use this cheat quite often when working with really large builds because sometimes 4 floors are just too limiting. So in our case, the 5th floor is not in any way going to be functional. I more so think of it as part of a roof, but it's definitely a way where you can add a little bit more height to your build. So in real life, the statues at the front, which you just saw me place, represent harmony and poetry, and they are technically more like golden. But like I've already mentioned, we don't really have all that many golden pieces, and a lot of them are like very yellow. And since a lot of them were also very small, that means when sizing them up, they start to look just not very good anymore. So instead, I found that our most solid option was to go for the knights and also these fairies sitting down from the vampire pack. And so while they are not golden, I do still think it looks really good and it matches the build really well. So the top of the opera house also has a big rounded roof that is a little bit raised up from the rest of the roof. And so we're essentially doing the same thing here as we did with the curved walls on the side, adding this piece from high school years, actually adding multiple of it, raising it up accordingly so that it kind of works as our wall. And then we just add a lot of details to it. So to get the llama corbels from the castle estate to actually sort of stick to this rounded piece, you saw me add a few walls. They're just completely covered up, but that meant that it actually had something to snap to. And then we are again adding a lot of dormers. I'm using the tool mod to rotate them just so that I know that they are all rotated at the same angle. And again, I don't actually think that these are dormers. I also think that they are just like a rounded detail. So I am once again going in and just adding all of these busts of Princess Cordelia. And I think I've already mentioned it, but I'm honestly time and time again surprised at how well all of these things work together, because oftentimes my experience in The Sims 4 is that nothing matches, nothing has the same swatches, and the styles look too different to really work together. But this just turned out quite nicely, I think. I tried using these gargoyles from the Vampires pack, but I was a little bit too worried that their wings would get caught in the roof eventually. So instead we go in with some more trusty knights. From here we're moving on to the rectangular building at the back. I raised up the platforms and we're happy to find that they could be raised all the way. I actually didn't know that we could have this tall of a platform. And then I was also happily surprised that we could add recess to a half wall. And I didn't know this because I don't think I have ever worked with the maximum half wall before. So again, that just worked out quite nicely. So the frieze is the one from Vampires. I think if you zoom in, it might seem more wooden, but it was definitely the one that matched in color the best. And then we are adding columns from Life and Death that unfortunately, and this was not just this column, it was any column that I tried out, it couldn't really be raised any further than this. So luckily our trusty little frieze from high school years really came in handy once again. After these I also added the llama corbels because I just wanted as much detail as possible. So on top of this building we are going to have just a regular roof, and in each of the corners it has these like large statues, and I assume that these would also be copper statues because they also have that like green look. In the game the closest I could find was that luckily all of the statues from the Vampires pack came in this like bluish green grayish tone, but moving around and adding those other things I realized that they actually had to be so much bigger. So the pedestal is now double in size, and then these winged horses are thrice the size, and it's just kind of crazy how much you need to size something up so that it actually looks somewhat substantial because the rest of the build is just so big. But it's also just been a real pleasure to do something completely different and get challenged in so many ways, and having to try to figure out how you make this look even more expensive, even more grand, even more detailed within the means of The Sims 4. So for the pavement, first and foremost, you just saw that I had to move all of the curved foundation pieces and then actually add flooring underneath, because otherwise there's this glitch where it just like shows grass. And you would think that you could just do flooring underneath. I don't know why I have to like move the piece to do that. That's so annoying. But I had to because it's The Sims 4. And then in this area where I hadn't added flooring, there now was flooring. So I again had to move the curved area and then delete that flooring. It was just a whole process. But the pavement is made up of these larger tiles. I think it's actually just a base game one, these like big square ones. And then I used this other base game flooring to kind of frame it. I am getting so distracted. I luckily don't think the microphone is picking it up, but all the time while I've been recording, I've just had a snoring dog right next to me. He insists on being as close to me as possible, so I've literally had to get a chair so that he's like closer in height and so that I can scratch him every now and then, because otherwise he gets upset. So I'm so sorry if I seem very distracted in this entire video. It just is very distracting, but I will try my best to continue with the commentary. So the building is almost done, which is also why I now dare to add the custom roofs, even though I am very aware that once I get back to this and do the inside, all of these roofs will delete themselves. But I think for the final shots and also just to show you what it is intended to look like at the end, we still want to do it. Now I've mentioned, I think by now in multiple other videos, that figuring out the height that these custom roofs go at isn't really a full-on guessing game, but I will admit that it is a lot more difficult to figure out when you suddenly don't have half walls to go off of, because what you're placing your roof on top is a debug item. And that's why there was that like weird clip with the stairs. I was honestly kind of trying to like count the steps and do an estimate, and I actually got it right. Just saying. Now this weird roof glitch I have definitely experienced before, but with this it was very troublesome because it's just so big. So I decided my best bet was to try and just cover it up with these roof pieces, and I try out multiple different things, and it's not really until later that I think I realized that the issue is actually that we are placing a roof on top of half walls, and that's kind of what making it glitch out, because what you might have noticed but what I haven't noticed yet is as soon as I move the roof in one piece, we actually do get the full wall back. So that of course also meant that this ended up actually being a pretty easy fix, because it's not really a problem that the roof is like one tile in, especially not because it's just so big, and I could also still do the overhang, so I actually think it looks really natural. It is of course still unfortunate because I definitely feel like there would be other times where you would want the walls to sort of continue, but for this build I was just happy that it worked out. I think by now I am a little bit done with this build. I just want to get in the final details, and that is what we will be working on here. So this rounded roof in the middle is quite big, and it kind of consists of two parts, and I will admit that by now I have no idea. For the first time probably, this is just complete guesswork of where this roof should go. But it still works out, looks really nice. And then I will be adding a statue because the reference photo that I looked at was apparently at an angle where I hadn't really noticed that this statue actually doesn't go on this roof. Now, luckily, I do figure that out. It is supposed to go on the roof right behind us, but I just wanted to show you this clip because that's how I like created it. So I again used this gorgeous lady from the Vampires pack in this like grayish greenish tone. Added 3 of the same statue in total, but like rotated them. And I do actually think that this looked like some of the copper statues that we see. And then in real life, this is a statue of Apollo holding up a lyre. Is that the correct pronunciation? I hope it is. But since we don't have that in The Sims 4, you saw me add a golden star instead. And while it definitely bothered me a little bit that it had that like wooden base, I had to tell myself that like no one else is going to see that. This really doesn't matter. And as soon as you are like zoomed out and just taking in the overall of the building, I think it looks good. So we are finally adding the last bit of the roof. And as this video is coming to an end, I think it's very important that I just remember to tell you that I am actually away for the next couple of Saturdays. I'm going on holiday with my family, but I have pre-recorded videos. Now this, as you can probably tell by now, is only the first part, but I have not pre-recorded the second part. I have just worked on this and just finished this. So if you want to see the inside of the building, I do plan on creating it, but it will be at least 4 weeks, maybe even 5 weeks before I get it done. And I know that that's just bad planning on my part, but I'm trying my best. And with that, I have a dog to walk, so I wish you a lovely day. I hope to see you next time, and bye!